Hi, boys and girls. Happy Friday. Today I want to focus on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, actually. We did not have a chance to do that on Wednesday, and I normally do it on Wednesday, but because of the long weekend we had, we were doing some other things, but I don't want us to miss out on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I'm going to read chapter 12 to you today. But before I do that, I want to go over some of the vocabulary that you will hear in chapter 12. The first vocabulary word is kingfisher. And a kingfisher is a brightly colored bird. Thrush, another type of bird, but it's a small songbird. Pavilion, a large, luxurious tent. Alsatian is a large dog. More commonly known today as a German Shepherd, but in the story you're going to hear it referred to as Alsatian. And then we have some expressions that I'd like to go over with you again before I read chapter 12. Velvet them is an expression you're going to hear as I read chapter 12, and it means to hold the claws in. So an animal pulling their claws in. Win his spurs is another expression that you're going to hear, and it means prove his skill and bravery. So those are some vocabulary words and expressions that you're going to hear as I read chapter 12 to you today. And I am going to assign you a few things to do with chapter 12 today. So we are going to do some writing and some comprehension questions and things like that. So that's all I'll have for you today, so that it's not too overwhelming. And I will also have you do the lap book pages for chapter 12. And there are several of them. There are 3, I believe. And they look like this. And they're going to say chapter 12 at the top. There they are. These are just little extra pieces that you can use to decorate with. Okay? But this one is called the T-book, and it gives you some of the directions right here, sort of on how to put it together, and this is part of the T-book as well, okay? So this little piece here is the title cover of the T-book. And then there's the crown piece, and then there's this piece here, okay? So you'll have those to do. And I'm going to have you answer 3 comprehension questions for me. And I'll read those to you right now before I read this chapter so that you can be thinking about them as I read. So the first question that I'll want you to answer after listening to chapter 12 is, what did the children understand had happened when the magic spring began? So that's question number 1. Question number 2, describe, well, it's not really a question. Describe the stone table. So give me a description of the stone table. Tell me what it looks like. Not just 1 or 2 things. Give me a complete description. And the third comprehension question that I have is, how did the beavers and the children feel when they saw Aslan? So those are the 3 things that I'll want you to answer. And you can go ahead and answer that right in Google Docs and share it with me. And the writing piece that I have, the full writing piece that I have for you to do today is write a journal entry that one of the girls so you're either going to be Susan or Lucy, might have written about meeting Aslan. So once you hear chapter 12, I want you to answer those 3 questions, write a journal entry. So you have to be either Susan and Lucy or Lucy, you may choose, and talk about what you saw, how you felt, those kinds of things when you met Aslan, based on what you hear me read. And you can do all of it right in Google Docs, so you can do it right in the same document, and then you can share that with me. And I'll go over those one more time when I'm done reading chapter 12. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 12 is called Peter's First Battle. Now remember, in chapter 11, spring was coming, right? The snow was starting to melt. The White Witch's sledge got stuck as she was trying to make it to the stone table before the children and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. And Edmund is with her as her prisoner. And Mr. and Mrs. Beaver and the other 3 children, Susan, Peter, and Lucy, are on foot trying to get to the stone table to meet Aslan. And as I hope you remember back maybe in chapter 9 or 10, Mr. Beaver told the children about the prophecy that when 4 humans, basically 2 sons of Adam and 2 daughters of Eve, sit on the thrones at Char Parvel, the White Witch's spell will be broken. That's part of the prophecy. The other part of the prophecy is that Aslan will come. And when these 2 prophecies sort of come together and happen at the same time, the White Witch's spell will be broken and Narnia will be returned to its natural state. So let's find out who gets to the stone table first. Well, the dwarf and the White Witch were saying this. Miles away, the beavers and the children were walking on hours after hour into what seemed a delicious dream. Long ago, they had left their coats behind them. And by now, they had even stopped saying to one another, "Look, there's a kingfisher," or "I see bluebells," or "What was that lovely smell?" or "Just listen to that thrush." They walked on in silence, drinking it all in, passing through patches of warm sunlight into cool green thickets and out again into wide mossy glades where tall elms raised the leafy roof far overhead, and then into dense masses of flowering currant and among hawthorn bushes where the sweet smell was almost overpowering. They had been just as surprised as Edmund when they saw that winter was vanishing and the whole wood passing in a few hours or so from January to May. They hadn't even known for certain, as the witch did, that this was what would happen when Aslan came to Narnia. So the witch knew, but the children didn't realize that. But they all knew that it was her spells which had produced the endless winter, and therefore they all knew when this magic spring began that something had gone wrong, and badly wrong, with the witch's schemes. And after the thaw had been going on for some time, they all realized that the witch would no longer be able to use her sledge. After that, they didn't hurry as much as they allowed themselves more rest and longer ones. They were pretty tired by now, of course, but not what I'd call bitterly tired, only slow and feeling very dreamy and quite inside, as one does when one is coming to the end of a long day in the open. Susan had a slight blister on one heel. They had left the course of the big river some time ago, for one had to turn a little to the right. That meant a little to the south, to reach the place of the stone table. Even if this had not been their way, they couldn't have kept to the river valley once the thaw began. For with all that melting snow, the river was soon in flood, a wonderful, roaring, thundering, yellow flood, and their path would have been underwater. And now the sun got low, and the light got redder, and the shadows got longer, and the flowers began to think about closing. "Not long now," said Mr. Beaver, and began leading them uphill across some very deep, springy moss. It felt nice under their feet. In a place where only tall trees grew very wide apart, the climb, coming to the end of a long day, made them all pant and blow. And just as Lucy was wondering whether she could really get to the top without another long rest, suddenly they were at the top, and this is what they saw. They were on a green open space from which you could look down on the forest spreading as far as one could see in every direction, except right ahead, there, far to the east, was something twinkling and moving. "By gum," whispered Peter to Susan, "the sea." In the very middle of this open hilltop was the stone table. It was a great grim slab of gray stone, supported on 4 upright stones. It looked very old, and it was cut all over with strange lines and figures that might be the letters of an unknown language. They gave you a curious feeling when you looked at them. The next thing they saw was a pavilion pitched on one side of the open place. A wonderful pavilion it was, and especially now when the light of the setting sun fell upon it, with 2 sides of what looked like yellow silk and cords of crimson and tent pegs of ivory, and high above it on a pole a banner which bore a red rampant lion fluttering in the breeze which was blowing in their faces from the far off sea. While they were looking at this, they heard a sound of music on their right, and turning in that direction, they saw what they had come to see. Aslan stood in the center of a crowd of centaurs who had grouped themselves around him in the shape of a half moon. There were tree women there, and well women, dryads and naiads, as they used to be called in our world, who had stringed instruments. It was they who had made the music. There were 4 giant centaurs. The horse part of them was like huge English farm horses, and the man part was like stern but beautiful giants. There was also a unicorn and a bull with the head of a man, and a pelican and an eagle and a great dog. And next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other... Sorry, I lost my place. And next to Aslan stood 2 leopards, of whom one carried his crown and the other his standard. But as for Aslan himself, the beavers and the children didn't know what to do or say when they saw him. People who have not been to Narnia sometimes think a thing cannot be good and terrible at the same time. If the children had ever thought so, they were cured of that now. For when they tried to look at Aslan's face, they just caught a glimpse of the golden mane and the great royal, solemn, overwhelming eyes, and then they found they couldn't look at him and went all trembly. "Go on," whispered Mr. Beaver. "No," whispered Peter, "you first." "No, son of Adam before animals," whispered Mr. Beaver back again. And here's a picture of some of the creatures that are surrounding Aslan and are on his side. And what these few pages we're talking about is that he is so powerful and good that they're a little overwhelmed, the children are, and are a little afraid to approach him. "Susan," whispered Peter, "what about you? Ladies first." "No, you're the eldest," whispered Susan. And of course, the longer they went on doing this, the more awkward they felt. Then at last, Peter realized that it was up to him. He drew his sword and raised it to the salute, and hastily saying to the others, "Come on, pull yourselves together," he advanced to the lion and said, "We have come, Aslan." "Welcome, Peter, son of Adam," said Aslan. "Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. Welcome, he beaver and she beaver." His voice was deep and rich and somehow took the fidgets out of them. They now felt glad and quiet, and it didn't seem awkward to them to stand and say nothing. "But where is the fourth?" asked Aslan. He has tried to betray them and join the White Witch, O Aslan," said Mr. Beaver. And then something made Peter say, "That was partly my fault, Aslan. I was angry with him, and I think that helped him to go wrong." And Aslan said nothing, either to excuse Peter or to blame him, but merely stood looking at him with his great, unchanging eyes. And it seemed to all of them that there was nothing to be said. "Please, Aslan," said Lucy, "can anything be done to save Edmund?" "All shall be done," said Aslan, "but it may be harder than you think." And then he was silent again for some time. Up to that moment, Lucy had been thinking how royal and strong and peaceful his face looked. Now it suddenly came into her head that he looked sad as well. But next minute, that expression was quite gone. The lion shook his mane and clapped his paws together. Terrible, terrible paws, thought Lucy, if he didn't know how to velvet them. And said, "Meanwhile, let the feast be prepared. Ladies, take these daughters of Eve to the pavilion and minister to them." When the girls had gone, Aslan laid his paw, and though it was velveted, it was very heavy, on Peter's shoulder, and said, "Come, son of Adam, and I will show you a far-off sight of the castle where you are to be king." And Peter, with his sword still drawn in his hand, went with the lion to the eastern edge of the hilltop. There a beautiful sight met their eyes. The sun was setting behind their backs. That meant that the whole country below them lay in the evening light. Forest and hills and valleys winding away like a silver snake. The lower part of the great river. And beyond all this, miles away, was the sea. And beyond the sea, the sky, full of clouds, which were just turning rose color with the reflection of the sunset. But just where the land of Narnia met the sea, in fact, at the mouth of the great river, there was something on a little hill shining. It was shining because it was a castle, and of course the sunlight was reflected from all of the windows which looked toward Peter and the sunset. But to Peter, it looked like a great star resting on the seashore. That, oh man, said Aslan, is Char Parvel of the Four Thrones, in one of which you must sit as king. I show it to you because you are the firstborn, and you will be high king over all the rest. And once more Peter said nothing, for at that moment a strange noise woke the silence suddenly. It was like a bugle, but richer. It is your sister's horn, said Aslan to Peter in a low voice, as low as to be almost a purr, if it is not disrespectful to think of a lion purring. For a moment, Peter did not understand. Then when he saw all of the other centaurs start forward and heard Aslan say with a wave of his paw, "Back! Let the prince win his spurs," he did understand and set off running as hard as he could to the pavilion. And there he saw a dreadful sight. The naiads and dryads were scattering in every direction. Lucy was running towards him as fast as her short legs would carry her, and her face was as white as paper. Then he saw Susan make a dash for a tree and swing herself up, followed by a huge gray beast. At first, Peter thought it was a bear. Then he saw that it looked like, remember what we said, like the big dog, okay? A Salian. Though it was far too big to be a dog. Then he realized that it was a wolf standing on his hind legs with its front paws against the tree trunk, snapping and snarling. All the hair on its back stood up on end. Susan had not been able to get higher than the second big branch. One of her legs hung down so that her foot was only an inch or two above the snapping teeth. Peter wondered why she did not get higher or at least take a better grip. Then he realized that she was just going to faint, and that if she fainted, she would fall off. Peter did not feel very brave. Indeed, he felt he was going to be sick. But that made no difference to what he had to do. He rushed straight up to the monster and aimed a slash of his sword at its side. That stroke never reached the wolf. Quick as lightning, it turned around, its eyes flaming and its mouth wide open in howl of anger. If it had not been so angry that it simply had to howl, it would have got him by the throat at once. As it was, though, all this happened too quickly for Peter to think at all. He had just time to duck down and plunge his sword as hard as he could between the brute's forelegs into its heart. Then came a horrible, confused moment, like something in a nightmare. He was tugging and pulling, and the wolf seemed neither alive nor dead. And and its bared teeth knocked against his forehead, and everything was blood and heat and hair. A moment later, he found that the monster lay dead, and he had drawn his sword out of it and was straightening his back and rubbing the sweat off his face and out of his eyes. He felt tired all over. Then, after a bit, Susan came down the tree. She and Peter felt pretty shaky, and when they met, and I won't say there wasn't kissing and crying on both sides, but in Narnia, no one thinks any of the worse of you for that. Quick, quick, shouted the voice of Aslan. Centaurs, eagles! I see another wolf in the thickets. There, behind you. He has just darted away. After him, all of you. He will be going to his mistress. Now is your chance to find the witch and rescue the fourth son of Adam. And instantly, with a thunder of hooves and beating of wings, a dozen or so of the swiftest centaurs disappeared into the gathering darkness. Peter, still out of breath, turned and saw Aslan close at hand. You have forgotten to clean your sword, said Aslan. It was true. Peter blushed when he looked at the bright blade and saw it all smeared with the wolf's hair and blood. He stooped down and wiped it quite clean on the grass, and then wiped it quite dry on his coat. Hand it to me and kneel, son of Adam, said Aslan. And when Peter had done so, he stuck him with the flat of the blade and said, Rise up, Sir Peter Wolfbane, and whatever happens, never forget to wipe your sword. And that's the end of chapter 12. So, I think you probably know that the wolf was one of the White Witch's wolves, trying to get to Susan, of course. And I think that you probably can figure out that from this chapter, I think there's probably going to be a war ahead. What we don't know yet is if they can save Edmund. Hopefully we'll find that out pretty soon. So when Aslan tells him to always clean his sword and things like that, it's to have respect for your sword and be a good, brave soldier. And when Aslan tapped Peter with the flat end of the sword, he sort of was kind of knighting him in a way. It's something that was done during that time. I hate not reading this with you. It's so much easier to stop and have a conversation about what is meant. Anyhow, I think the whole sort of summary of the chapter is that the children and Mr. and Mrs. Beaver have reached the stone table. They have met Aslan. Aslan has many followers on his side, just like the White Witch has quite a few on hers. And they're going to get prepared for whatever happens next, basically. So let's revisit some of the things that I want you to do today after reading or listening to chapter 12. Remember that I want you to answer 3 questions for me. And question number 1 is, what did the children understand had happened when the magic spring began? So the children understood something when they started seeing winter going away and spring coming. They realized, they knew something was happening. What did they know was happening? Number 2, describe the stone table. And you can always try to go back in the video and listen to me reread the description of the stone table so that you can describe it in a little bit more detail. Number 3, how did the beavers and the children feel when they saw Aslan? So those are the 3 questions that I want you to answer in Google Docs in complete sentences with capitals and periods and things like that. I have had some people that don't have their capitals and periods and things in their writing, and they need to have that. Okay, boys and girls? And then the last thing that I would like you to do today is to write a journal entry that one of the girls might have written about meeting Aslan. So you could be Susan, you could be Lucy. Tell me how you felt, what you saw, things like that when you met Aslan. And again, you can do that right in the same Google document as answering these 3 questions. I hope you enjoyed chapter 12. I hope you're excited to find out what happens.